Hello, everyone. Let me know if you can hear me right now. Want to make sure that everything is working as we get ready to get started with the class today. Okay, I see all good. That is good to hear. Sound is good. Awesome. Yeah, another heads up for all of you joining is that there is a little bit of a delay between us. So about 5 seconds or so. So if I pause for a weird period of time after asking a question, it's because I'm waiting for you to actually hear my question, then answer it, and then we can all go from there. But just wanted to let you all know about that. How is everyone doing on this Tuesday evening? It's raining outside where I am right now. So hopefully there won't be any too loud of thunder or anything like that as we go through the class. But as you are all coming in and joining, please let me know where you are joining from. I'm guessing that most people for the subject of the class are going to be joining from somewhere in Eastern North America, but let me know. I'm really curious to see where everyone is joining from. Okay, I see Michigan, Virginia, Pennsylvania. Also, if I look off like this, that means that I'm reading your guys' comments. And I see a question about whether or not this class will be available after it actually happens, and the answer is yes. If you go to the description, if you're just joining, from YouTube Live or anything like that, if you go to the description, there will be an area where you can sign up for the class, and there you will be sent a link with the recording. I don't think that I'll be leaving it up forever on YouTube, but you'll have a link to it so you can always access it no matter what. So it'll be available from that link forever. It'll be free forever. And yes, you will definitely have access to it afterwards. Okay, a lot of people: Ontario, Buffalo, New York, Mobile, Alabama, more from Alabama, Western Kentucky, Tennessee, uh, Green Spring, West Virginia, Tennessee, more Michigan. Awesome. Seems like we have a uh, really good representation from all across Eastern North America, which I'm really excited about. And I specifically, went through and I tried to pick as many species that would be as broadly applicable to all of us as I could. So, yeah, really, I'm very excited that all of you are joining me for this class. This is a subject that has been a big passion of mine for many years now. Early on when I got into my foraging journey, I kind of got hooked on this idea and this concept, and so I spent a lot of time with it, and I'm just really happy to see that you all are interested in it as well. And a big thing would be, um, after this happens, or during, or any time in between, if you can share this with people, that would be a huge help to me. And what you'll find as we walk through it is that my premise is the subject that I'm teaching here only grows in value the more people that you share it with. You won't get as much value from it if only you learn about it, compared to if you learn about it and your neighbor learns about it and community learns about it as well. The more people that learn about this, the better. And we'll learn more about that as we go through the presentation today. And we are just rounding at 7:30 right now. So I'll probably give people about 5 minutes or so before we get into the meat of the presentation, in order for people to make sure that they have enough time to sit down, to have a nice evening tea or whatever it is that they are having while they're watching this. A question about how long that I expect this class will be. I am shooting for it to be around an hour and 15 minutes. But if you've been to one of my live classes before, I can go long sometimes. So that may happen. But before we dive into it, I'll kind of give you an overview of the structure of the class. So we're going to, let me go ahead and switch to this view right here. So this is our presentation, and the first part of it is going to be kind of introducing the idea of what do we mean when we say emergency wild food, and what's going on with this wild food stuff, what's going on with this foraging thing, just an overall kind of view of all of that. The second part will get into particular tools and techniques that are important for anyone to know as they're kind of exploring this subject more. And then the final part will be like, what are these species? And as you'll find, like, I bet that we could take any number of the species that I cover in this presentation today, and we could probably do a whole, hour and 15 long class on each of them, if not a whole weekend workshop on each of them. So I would say we're not going to go for quite like a 10,000 foot view with all of this. Maybe we're going for like a 1,000 or 100 foot view, but we're not going to be getting into the, nitty gritty weeds of each and every species. Unfortunately, we don't have the time for that, but we will be going into as much detail as I reasonably can for the presentation to get to share with all of you today. And let me see. Okay, while we still have a few people joining, I want to test out a few things. Actually, I'll test them out later on. Let me see. Top chat. There are a few new live options that YouTube gives me. Okay, I'm gonna try this. Ask a question here. Okay, you should see, oh, that's cool. You should see an ask a question here thing, and you can use that to, if there's a question that you want, that'll be the best way that I can see it. A few times throughout the presentation, I will pause and I will look at that, and I will try to address some of the things that I see there. So that is a good place to leave those. And someone said, is this working? It is working. So yes, if you leave a question there, then that'll be a better way that I can see them as I pause throughout the presentation. I'm not sure how many that we'll get, and I'm usually not able to answer all of them, but I'll answer as many as I can, especially the ones that will be relevant to as many people as possible. Cool. So, and then we might do a poll as well. I'll try that out partway through the presentation. Okay, one last note about this. So like I mentioned at the beginning, this class is completely free, and for information like this, I'm always very thankful that I get to do these presentations for free. And I am able to do that and to make all of these free through the supporters and users of my app, which is right here, called Gather, the Foraging app. This is my app. I made it. It's not by a big company or anything, and it's what allows me to do classes like this. I'll be mentioning it throughout the presentation and how I think that it is the most powerful tool that you can use in order to learn foraging, especially if you're new to foraging, new to wild food. You'll see how it's going to really, I made this tool to be the thing that I wish existed when I started foraging over a decade ago. And I'll just save the rest of the bit for how you can use it throughout the presentation, because you'll see how it will naturally fit on the things that we will be discussing. Okay, so I think with that, we will be ready to get started. So thank you everyone for joining. And this is Emergency Wild Food of Eastern North America. Let's begin. All right. One of the things that kind of like got me really excited about making this class is, for those of you who don't know, I make a lot of videos online. And because I make a lot of videos online, I get a lot of comments online. And because of that, I get a fun kind of insight into how average people who aren't really into the foraging community and whatnot see and think about foraging. And as I started to talk about the importance of caloric wild foods, one comment would often pop up, which is the general idea that foraging won't feed you. Why are you bothering? Foraging is not going to be able to give you enough energy in order to do anything. And of course, we know that that is not true. All of you are here watching this right now because your ancestors were very successful foragers, and they were able to get all the food that they needed, well before the advent of human agriculture. All of the foods that you see here are from my actual shelf, and all of them, except for the juniper, which snuck into the photo right there, all of them are very energy-dense wild foods and can provide a lot of calories to you. But another thing that comes along with that statement is, foraging won't feed you. You should garden instead. And for me, really, I don't see there being this kind of hard stop between what is foraging and what is gardening. Really, I see those existing along a line of a spectrum, where on the far left, we'd have things like, complete foraging and wildcrafting in a completely wild scenario, no human ever touched it or tended to it in any way, shape, or form. And then we go a little bit further along and we have what a teacher of mine, Sam Thayer, calls ecoculture. Another idea of this would be tending the wild. And so this would be things like prescribed fire in order to keep a landscape more open, to allow more sunlight in, so that more food species like wild fruits and nuts can be more successful in that environment. It might be, just managing an area for selecting certain food plants in order for them to thrive over other ones, like removing invasive species so that important food plants can thrive around you. That really is ecoculture, which I think is an important endeavor, especially today. Then we go a little bit further and then we get into, more specific gardening where you are setting aside a plot for growing food and you're maybe growing annual vegetables or things like that. And then we keep on going onto the far end, which is where most of modern calories come from today, which is industrial agriculture, where we are plowing now acres and acres of land, and we are using chemical fertilizers and herbicide and pesticide in order to artificially grow, way more than we otherwise could have on that specific plot of land. And for us, I see us, being able to do a lot of things from the foraging and wildcrafting all the way up to the homesteading. And a big thing that we're seeing now is that this part above me, industrial agriculture, relies heavily on petroleum. It relies heavily on shipping, on growing things in other places. And a big thing that I want to impart to all of you watching, if the only thing that we get from this is that we bring our food a little bit closer to home, a little bit closer to where we actually live, then I think we've done a really positive thing. So a big part of this, isn't just like, oh, I need to get something right now, but it is how can I bring, more of my food, doesn't have to be all, it never has to be all, but more of my food closer to where I come from, then we've done a lot. But getting back to that question, you should garden instead, my answer to that has always been, why not both, right? So here are two photos of different kinds of foraging that I do. And on the left, we have me foraging for one of my favorite plants, which you will learn about a little bit later in the presentation, called American lotus. And this is in a completely wild setting. No human had any part in that landscape or that waterscape being the way that it is. And so I just get to go there and I get to take advantage of what the wild has produced. And then above me right here, this is now in my backyard in a garden. And here I'm growing a plant called sunchoke, another one that we'll learn about. And this is less of foraging, but it is still a native wild plant to Eastern North America. And so it's thriving a little bit better, and I don't really have to manage it much, even though it is in a garden. So these are two examples kind of along that spectrum. And I'm going to try a poll here to see if this works. Because a big thing that I postulate is that between, foraging and gardening, you are going to be able to get way more calories by combining both of them than by trying to do one over the other. So I want to ask all of you, let's see right here. Let's try this. Okay. Are you a gardener, forager, or both? Gardener, forager, and then one more option, both. And then we'll return to that in a bit. This is my first time trying out the poll. So go to the chat area and there should be a poll popping up. And then in a second, we'll revisit that and we'll see what the results were. But yeah, so when it comes to gardening, or when it comes to anything really, you have only a certain amount of energy that you can invest into all of that. And maybe you only have a certain amount of land that you can invest into all of that. And doing this stuff, gardening, producing food, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy, it takes resources. And because you are limited on that, you can do this kind of trick, basically. Sometimes to me it feels like a trick, where you can learn the you can learn to, how would I put it? You can learn to read the output of nature's garden, right? You have your garden and you tended to it and you did most of the things that were going on with that, or you influenced most of the things that were going on with your garden. But then we have nature's garden, which produces tons and tons of food. You know, behind me, this American persimmon and that oak tree over there on the left will produce thousands and thousands of calories without anyone ever tending to it. No one had to water it. In many cases, no one planted it. No one did anything. They just stand there and they produce thousands of calories every single year. And all you need to know is what to look for. And so a big part of this class and my app as well is showing you this is what you want to be looking for, because the reality is I can't even begin to predict how many hundreds of thousands, millions of calories go unused that could otherwise be used in the wild. Around me, you know, you'll have a park or something that has persimmons that are dropping, and there aren't a lot of animals that are eating it because it's kind of in a suburban area, and there aren't a lot of people eating it, so a bunch of them just kind of, you know, rot under the tree every single year. And just imagine how many calories that would be if all of us were taking more advantage of what is already there. But I can't blame people for having this idea that, you know, how could foraging ever feed you? Foraging won't give you any calories, because, you know, by and large, most of what you see when it comes to foraging and general foraging info online and things like that is often about wild, edible, leafy greens. And it's, you know, largely like, hey, did you know that dandelion is edible? Which is a pretty cool notion for a lot of people. At one point for me, I was that person who was like, wow, I didn't know that dandelion is edible. And these are common and they're familiar to a lot of people. So we see a lot of videos and education about this. Or the one in the middle here is violet, and then plantain, another one I see all the time of like plantain edible, or dandelion edible. And they're all, you know, really wonderful wild food species. But the reality is, if you could sit down on the couch and I was going to deliver to you all of the dandelion that you could ever eat, you didn't have to expend any energy towards it. I'm going to give you all the dandelion that you can possibly eat. Unfortunately, you would starve eating all the dandelion that you could possibly eat. Because the reality is that dandelion just does not produce enough calories in order to sustain you. And it would take more energy to literally consume and digest dandelion than it would give you. So what we're looking for when it comes to wild food, wild emergency food of any kind, is a return on investment, right? Very simply, we need to get more calories out of the calories that we spend in order to gather and process our wild food into a viable food that we can consume. That's all that it comes down to, right? And what I did is I came up with a kind of rating system for this to make it a bit easier to, you know, figure out what makes a really good emergency or survival wild food versus a not as good one. And so in my ranking system, very high on the scale, the highest on the scale is energy payoff, right? And that is kind of encapsulating the calories that you have to spend and how many calories do you get out of it and how easily can you consume those calories. For instance, you know, you could have a kudzu root, right? Which has a lot of calories in it. The problem is it comes with a ton of fiber. And so if you were to try to just straight up eat the kudzu root, though there's a lot of energy in there, even if it wasn't much effort to like get the kudzu root, your body would expend a ton of energy trying to actually consume those calories. So all of that plays into it. And then the next three things are how easy is it to process that wild food, to preserve it, and to gather it. So generally encapsulating the amount of effort that's required for all of those things. But then two additional ones that I added at the end are tool requirement. So it loses points if it requires a lot of tools in order to be effective, in order for you to effectively gather those calories. And then the final one would be, which I think, you know, it's not the most important thing, but is important, is the eating experience. You know, is it something that tastes really bad, that isn't enjoyable to eat, or is it something that happens to be delicious as well? And so all of these things are important, and they're going to help us to get a nice clear picture on, you know, what we really want to be going out of our way in order to spend our time and effort learning about. Okay? I'm going to check over here for a second. Have a sip of water. Okay. So then we get into, what is emergency wild food? Why is this class called emergency wild food? And it's kind of in two parts. So in big measure, I found what I was trying to communicate to people is long-term survival wild food. But often that, one is very wordy. And when I say emergency, most people think of what I'm trying to convey with that. Because a funny thing is, in like the truest sense of emergency, like, oh my gosh, I need calories right now, right this moment. When you watch like survival videos or TV shows or things like that, they make it seem like that's a really common thing that could occur. But the reality is, in a true survival situation, if you happen to find yourself in one, like, oh my gosh, I'm now in a survival situation, food is one of the last things you want to be worrying about, right? Depending on what the weather is like, shelter is going to be way up there, water is going to be way up there, but you can actually go a pretty long time without getting food to get yourself into a better situation where more food is available or whatever it might be. But I do want to provide some options for, what are things you could get at any time, right? So both of these are wild foods that you could gather at any time, pretty much all the way throughout the year, and you can get calories that are pretty easy to acquire, and it will just give you some food right then and there when you need them. So this one right above me is called slippery elm. It is a quick thing about it is not endangered. I'll talk more about it in a second. And you can harvest the inner bark at any time, and has a relatively high amount of starches and sugars in it that will provide you with calories if you need them right then and there, even in the middle of winter, anytime that you need them. The other one is on the left over there, and those are cattail rhizomes. And as well, they have a relatively high amount of starch in them that you can basically just you'll have to peel the outer core, and then you get this inner starchy core, and you can just chew on it, and you're getting calories. They are relatively easy to gather if you have cattails nearby, and they'll give you quick energy when you need them. But the other part of it is whatever else is available. If you really want to think about it, whatever else is available in season around you can be seen as emergency wild food, emergency calories, and you'll be able to use those. And the difficulty with that, kind of from me trying to teach this stuff to you, is that now we've kind of opened it up to everything, right? But if it were serviceberry season, that's the fruit on the far left, and all of a sudden you need food, you would have a ton of it available to you at that moment. Because serviceberry is relatively high in sugar. You can gather a large amount of it very easily. Also tastes delicious, so you can gather serviceberry. And then wineberry in the middle there a little bit later in the summer. Mulberry, this is one of our earliest fruits that we get in Eastern North America. So all of these can be viable emergency wild foods. Of course, the difficulty is that, now we've opened up Pandora's boxes, all of these different things that we could learn. And this is really where my app can come in and help you. So it really is a foraging guide that is tailored to you and your area. So for all the species that we just mentioned, it'll show you if they grow in your area. And if they do grow in your area, then it will show you the specific season for them. So I opened up my app today, and I was checking on the season for different fruits, and mulberry season is coming up in my area. And it's telling me like, hey, this is what you want to be looking for. As well, if you are a beginner, a big thing that we offer is lookalike guides that are also tailored to your area. So you won't be seeing, lookalike comparisons for things that just completely don't grow where you are. Maybe it grows in California, but you're in Tennessee, then you don't need to worry about those. So I'll quickly mention that if you are interested in trying that out, don't directly download it from the App Store, but instead you can use this QR code right here. Or you can use the link in the description, which has the Feral code from Feral Foraging, and that will give you a free month-long trial to try out the app and see if it'll be useful to you, especially if you are earlier on in your foraging journey. Like I said, I think it is the perfect tool to give you a big jump start and to tell you all the things that I wish I knew or would be told about when I started foraging. So I wanted to just briefly mention that before we get into the rest of the class. So this kind of covers all the rest of whatever is available. Okay. Just one more thing here that I wanted to mention as we get into the next section. I think as I was going through these species, I really think of them in these three different scales. So on the far left, we have like the ones that I mentioned initially, like true emergency wild food, where they're not going to require too much effort to gather. They're not going to maybe not even require any amount of processing at all, and you can just get some calories from them. So a little bit of effort for a little bit of a payout, right? And then in the middle, we have more survival situation, where these ones are going to be a bit more effort. They're going to be generally available to you wherever you are, and you're going to get a bit more out of them. And then we have on this end what I would consider a staple wild food. So these ones are going to require probably a lot more investment of time or energy, maybe even investment in skill and knowledge, maybe investment in tools, things like that. But the payoff from them will be huge, where once you have all the groundwork laid for that, you'll be able to get tons and tons of calories, and you'll be able to eat them, for years and years to come. And maybe something that you can gather in such quantities that you can actually store them year after year and build them up, that you could be giving them to your neighbors or things like that you can be sharing that knowledge with other people. And so we'll be learning about the whole kind of gambit of that spectrum throughout the class today with our species. Before I dive into the next section, which is tools and techniques, I'm briefly going to check the question area to see which ones have popped up. Yeah, so one question was, for a newbie, what are the best tools to have for foraging? So for like literal physical tools, we're about to get into that. But for learning tools, my app that I just mentioned would be one. And then the other one that I want to make sure to mention, if you're looking for a physical book, then this is the book that you want. You can kind of like screenshot what I'm holding right now. This is a book from one of my teachers that is by far the best foraging book that you can get for Eastern North America. If you're joining from Eastern North America, which I'm guessing most of you are, this is the book that you want to get, Sam Thayer's Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants of Eastern North America. So that is what it would be for the learning tools. Okay, and then I got a question for good protein wild foods, and we're going to be covering those when we get to the species. So I think for all of the questions, we're going to be getting to them naturally when we get into the next section. But a very good one that I want to cover is any experience with animal foraging or with animal forage. Oh, I misread that. I interpret it differently, but I will cover. So specifically in this class, we're talking about wild plant foraging, but wild animal hunting or fishing, both those things are both incredibly important skills to go along with this, and they complement it perfectly, right? This is the gather end of hunter-gatherer. But as the years go on, I get more into hunting and fishing myself, and when it comes to two of the more difficult macronutrients that we need to get, which are fats and proteins, often you'll have a much easier time getting those when it comes to animals as opposed to plants. But a big thing that I think makes learning more about foraging for plants more, not necessarily more important, but an imperative thing to do, despite there being, animal sources of food out there, is that, everyone kind of knows that you can eat generally, mammals, deer, and turkey and boar and things like that, and that you can, fish from the river and whatnot. But when it comes to, what plants can you eat, then it's like there's way more things that are available that you could choose from, and knowing what you can and can't eat becomes even more important. So that's why I see this education here as a pivotal thing. Okay, so then let's move on to the tools and techniques section. This is a very important thing. And I'm going to kind of broadly cover the general things you're going to run into when it comes to processing wild food as a whole. And knowing these different approaches to things, especially with modern tools, can be the difference in thousands of calories per hour and not. So it really is an important thing to learn about. Okay, there's a funny word for this first topic or concept I'm going to discuss, which is garbling. Now, the modern context of the word garbling is to, mess up or confuse, right? But the historical context of the word garble means, largely to select the good from the bad, right? So to pick the good stuff out and to leave the bad stuff behind. And a fun just like bit of etymology about this, the way that the meaning of the word changed is people would use the word garble to describe a situation where somebody changed a story by picking out only certain good parts of the story. So maybe they changed the story to make it seem like, it was better for them and like bad for someone else that they didn't like. And so they confused the meaning of the story. So as time went on, then garble ended up meaning to confuse. But I use garble here in the historical sense of the word because it's just the best way to describe, like, when we're getting wild food, most of the time for our like really important caloric wild food, it is not going to be given to us on a silver platter, right? Especially for the ones that can be preserved easily for a long time. There's going to be some degree of processing that we need to do to remove some part that we don't want and then to get the part that we do want. We all know the phrase, separating the wheat from the chaff. That is garbling. And we have to do the same thing with wild food. And another big thing is that for foods that we get from the grocery store, a lot of the time, we just don't even realize how much processing went into it getting to the grocery store in the form that it is in that we get. I'll get comments all the time when I share the process for doing something like acorns or hickory or whatever it might be, that like, wow, that looks like a lot of work. That's probably not worth it. And it is a lot of work, but it is worth it. And the big thing is you just never see that work when, it's done completely somewhere else in a agricultural setting. So the first common form of garbling that is extremely effective is winnowing. And so basically speaking, this is where we're using wind or air in order to blow off a light thing that we don't want and to keep a heavy thing that we do want. So here you can see that I'm holding a bucket over a fan and I'm dropping it into another bucket, and then right above me, you're kind of seeing, this is an action shot, so it's a little bit difficult to see what's going on, but you have these heavier bits that are falling into the bucket, and then way above me, you might be able to see kind of these blurs of leaves that are blowing off. So this is where I was able to, if I were to sort through that by hand, it would take forever to do that. But this will save me a ton of time and energy and a ton of calories in order to make the calories that I get out from this wild food hackberry way more effective. So winnowing is used all the time. You'll find more examples as we go through this species. Then we have, more general filtering or sifting, where the principle that we're using is we're keeping a thing that we do want, which is larger or smaller than a thing that we don't want. So the examples I'm showing here are hickory and then hackberry and then elderberry. And they come from this, there's a green little set of filters right there, which are, I think they're actually used for gold panning. And it is one of the most important foraging tools that I have. And if you sign up in the description for this class, which most of you I'm guessing are here because you signed up for via email, then I'm going to send out a set of resources in the notes as a follow-up to this, which will give you all of the tools that I recommend just as a baseline for wild food processing. So don't worry about, figuring out what each of these things are. I'll give you a whole list along with links and everything. But yeah, these filters, I use them all the time. Whenever I'm working with a new wild food, they'll come up inevitably. They're just so useful for so many different things, for getting ultra-fine flours, for separating, in that case, it was cleaning the hackberries, cleaning dirt off of them, for separating big chunks of hickory shell from nut meat. They're just, I never run out of uses for them. And then we get to an even finer level at the point of, these are like nut milk bags or just cloth bags or things like that, where the main area that I'm using this for is starch extraction. And you'll find as we go through this species how important that starch extraction is, where I'm leaving all the big fibers behind in the cloth. And starch, which is individually, each molecule is very small, will go all the way through. So here's another thing that I use all the time. Doesn't really need to be anything fancy, just some type of cloth, and the use for it comes up over and over. Okay, now the other big task that we have to do when it comes to wild food processing is preservation. And we have to do this because, it's not like the grocery store where we can just get, whatever, 2 cucumbers when we need 2 cucumbers. And next week I need 2 cucumbers, I'll just get 2 more, and so on and so on. We are getting all of what we need we're getting more than what we need at that moment, and we need to make sure that it lasts a certain amount of time beyond that. So this is where different techniques for preservation come into play. And there's, we could get into a lot of details about this, but for the most part, the one that we're going to be using with most of the caloric foods that we're talking about is going to be drying in some form or fashion. And one tool that I have here, which I really love, is kind of this cookie sheet rack that I think you might find in a restaurant or something like that. And I use that for drying all kinds of different things, for drying wild fruits, but especially for drying wild nuts. And it allows me to not have to use a dehydrator, which I'll talk about in a second. Anytime that I can, dehydrator is a smaller space, it's going to require a lot more energy, like literally more electric energy than just passive drying. And a lot of times passive drying does the trick. So whenever I can, I'm just using passive drying over an actual dehydrator. And then of course, jars are always a helpful tool to have. I can never have too many jars. And here's again another look at my pantry of a bunch of different. On the left is mainly wild herbs, and then right above me is wild caloric foods, things like starch and rice and hackberry, a bunch of different ones that we're going to talk about in the presentation here. But I said I don't like to use active dehydration if I don't have to, but there are also many instances where it makes life way easier, or you just have way more of a guarantee of things going well for drying stuff. Because, if you are relying more on getting calories from either gardening or from wild food, like something not from the grocery store, the worst thing that could happen is for you to, open up a bottle or whatever, and it's rotted because you didn't dry it enough. So I use an Excalibur dehydrator. All of them in general are perfectly fine. A big thing that I would recommend with a dehydrator is that you get, for whatever one that you have, some type of silicone mat. It just unlocks a bunch of different things that you can use the dehydrator for. So I will use that for dehydrating starch because they're very, very thin and small. And you just, couldn't put it on a mesh screen. So that is another recommendation that I would give to you. A big thing that I want to mention is, at least when it comes to wild food, I have not found a very strong, compelling reason to buy a freeze dryer. They're pretty cool tools, but they take up a lot of space. They are very expensive. They are not incredibly energy efficient. And so, if you're just getting into this, a lot of people think that they need to run off and get a freeze dryer, and you just don't have to. I have gotten away with not having one, and I expect that I'm going to continue to get away with not having one, as humans have done for a very, very long time. If you have one, that's great, and you can use it, and there's a lot of cool things that you can do with them, but I just don't want you to feel like you have to buy this really expensive product in order to be productive with your dehydration and with your preservation of wild food. Okay, and then two more that I just have to mention because they come up all the time, and these ones are more likely that you would have one of them or maybe even both of them because they do a lot of things, beyond relating to processing wild food. But the important thing is that these two things do very different tasks. So on the left, we have what I would generally refer to as a powerful blender. I have a Vitamix. It has been tried and true for me. It's never failed, and I beat the heck out of it. I really put it through its paces. A big thing that I got for it is a stainless steel canister because when I was dealing with a bunch of different wild food things, especially like hickory nuts, you'll see in a second, but I was chipping away the plastic, which is not something that you want to do. So stainless steel canister is a big plus for it, way more sturdy. And then above me, this is not a blender, but a food processor. And the importance of a food processor is that it will kind of hit something that you're dealing with or processing, but it won't completely pulverize everything. So here I'm showing an example with sumac, where I get tons and tons of sumac spice very easily. You don't need to buy sumac from the grocery store. It grows all around us, and there's no reason to buy something that was shipped from overseas when it's quite literally growing in all of our backyards. So not a lot of calories from this one, but just a really great way to illustrate how it can be used. So sumac is a kind of thin seed coating surrounded by a heavy seed on the inside, and that blade right there will hit the coating and will knock off the coating from the seed, but it won't break up the seed. If you were to use the blender, you would completely pulverize and break up the seed, the coating, and all. And so then down the line, when you want to separate them, because the seed is very astringent, it's impossible to do because everything is, super tiny. I also use the food processor with American Lotus. I use it with curly dock seed. There's a ton of different things you can use it for. So another one that the more different species that I learn about and use, the more I find myself using a food processor. They're very, very helpful. Okay, I'm going to check on the questions here really quick. Okay. I think I was told that the poll is blocking asking questions or something like that. So I'm going to end the poll and let's see what the results were. I don't know where to find the results now, but I was checking and it was 63% were, oh, there we go. 63% were that they do both, 22% were gardeners, and 15% were foragers. So, very cool. I'm hopeful that by the end of this presentation, we will take those remaining 22% gardeners and we will convert them to foragers as well. And for the foragers that were there that don't do gardening, it's a very cool thing, and I would highly recommend it. I'm not a good gardener, and I often joke that I got into foraging because I'm bad at gardening. But there's a lot of really amazing things that can be done on that kind of boundary between foraging and gardening that I encourage you to explore. Okay, few other questions while I'm looking here. Questions about sumac are coming up, and whether we're talking about staghorn sumac, you can use all of the seeds of the edible sumac, which is the genus Rus, in this way. Some of them are going to be easier to use than others. Some are going to be producing better spice than others. My favorite for our area of Eastern North America is dwarf sumac, but if I start talking about this, I'm going to talk way too long, and I need to keep on moving on. Okay, so one last thing that I wanted to cover before we get into the plants, and a big reason why I want to do this class is the idea of having community level investment in the tools that we're getting. So for instance, one of my favorite videos about black walnut processing is where this farmer had this kind of like old broken down tractor, but he was able to use the engine from it in order to make a machine that would de-hull the black walnut mechanically, which is really cool. And so if anyone were to build that, any individual, then it would probably cost them, I don't know, $800,000, something like that. And which is not, a viable option for most people. But if a community can get together and they can invest in, the one in the middle there, that is a machine for processing American lotus nuts or for processing lotus nuts in general. And it costs about $800 to get. This one above me is an oil press, an oil expeller press, and, can range in the realm of $2,000 or so, which again to an individual is probably more than the average person is wanting to get into. But you don't need everyone doesn't need their own oil press. One person in your community can get this, and then everyone else can take part, and or one person or one group of people can get one together. And then suddenly, we talked about that blend between emergency all the way to staple wild food. You are making more staple wild foods more viable for your community. So whether this is, a neighborhood community or a church community, a group of friends, whatever it might be, I think there are these opportunities to get these tools that I just wanted to mention. I'll include them in the resources that, again, for all of us, increasing the amount in Eastern North America that we as a group of people are getting our calories from our land, from our area, offers a huge potential that we can add to. So I just wanted to kind of mention that to all of you. Alrighty, time to get into the species, which, we can call it the meat and potatoes. For me, this is the fun part. Okay, just having a sip of water, and we will dive into them. Maybe every 3 species or so, I'll check to see if there are more questions that have popped up. But at the end, I will leave time to spend with all of you, just focus on answering questions. Okay, so the first one is one that we looked at the beginning. And it is the one on my list here that I think really heavily falls more into the emergency wild food side, which is slippery elm. Now, I mentioned before, there is a common misunderstanding with slippery elm that it is endangered and that they're all dying and things like that. And that is, by and large, not true. Slippery elm populations are very stable, and slippery elm is not affected by the emerald ash borer. Wait, no. Is it that one? I think I'm confusing that with ash. There's a pest that will affect, Dutch elm disease that affects American elm very, very heavily, but it does not affect slippery elm very much. So don't feel like you can never use slippery elm or things like that. For my rating system, I think that the energy payoff is 2 out of 5. You're getting a little bit for your work. Processing it's a little bit tedious and difficult to get off of the tree. Very easy to preserve. It dries up, very, very quickly. Doesn't require any specialized tools, really. And eating is, it can be good depending on what you do with it. An average 3 out of 5. So here is slippery elm inner bark that I have gathered from the tree. So you have to kind of remove the outer bark part after you've gotten the inner bark part. And that's kind of the more tedious bit. But a big thing that you can do with it is you don't have to gather the actual bark. You can just gather the twigs too if you really need to. And then you can just throw them all in a pot with water. And if you heat it up, it will extract a lot of these starches and the sugars that you can make a tea with it. And it's a very, very delicious thing to have. So from that perspective, I think it's very good. It can also be very soothing to the stomach. So, a big thing if you're having digestive distress in a survival situation, that can actually be life-threatening. So in many ways, slippery elm could potentially help with that as well. One thing that I forgot to mention, you see the way that I'm harvesting it, that I'm gathering things in long vertical strips. And that is what you would do if you want to minimize the amount of harm that you're doing to the tree when you're gathering the inner bark. So this will heal over the course of 3 years or so. But if you were to gather it horizontally from all the way around, you basically cut off, all the veins of the tree. And then that would be, pretty detrimental to it. So when you're gathering the bark, if you're gathering the bark, you want to be doing it in a vertical strip. But you can also do this with the branches as well. And in addition to that, I'm mentioning slippery elm here. There's another elm species called Ulmus pumila, which is Siberian elm, which can be used exactly the same way as slippery elm, but it is invasive. So not only can you gather Siberian elm, but you probably should, because you'd be removing a very aggressive, weedy, invasive tree. The photos here that I'm showing are for slippery elm because that is the main one that grows in my area. For scouting for them, a big thing that I'm going to be sharing with all of you is how to actually scout for these species. And I find that the easiest time to find slippery elm is actually in the wintertime. You see, they have these really big fuzzy buds. These ones are just starting to break. And if you look up at the tree, kind of the silhouette in the wintertime, you'll see very big fuzzy buds that kind of have a zigzag pattern on the branches. So a lot of my slippery elm I find when I'm driving around in the wintertime, and one just kind of catches my eye as I'm walking by or whatever it might be. But they also have, if you're trying to identify them, not in the wintertime when the leaves are out, they have very, very rough sandpapery leaves. So if you stick one on your shirt, it will stick to your shirt and it won't immediately fall off. And that is slippery elm. A question would be, would American elm work just as well as slippery elm? And the answer is no. American elm doesn't have the same sugary, starchy compounds that slippery elm has. Okay, alrighty. Now we're getting into oaks. I think oak is perhaps, like, if you were to aggregate the entire world, I think that oak might be the best survival food across the entire world that is available to pretty much everyone. For a lot of these, I'm going to show you the ranges for them. For oak, it's everywhere, pretty much. There are very few parts of North America, maybe kind of like some deserty areas, that don't have oaks with acorns that you can use. And you can eat the acorn with processing of any oak from any species, but some are going to be better than others, and I'm going to show you which ones to look for. Okay, so the energy payoff, what we're getting out of oaks is a high amount of carbohydrates and starch. So it can be pretty high, a pretty dense concentration of them. Processing takes a little bit of work, so only 2 out of 5. Preserving them, very, very easy. Once you get them dried, they can store for a very long time. With certain tools, gathering them is also incredibly easy. The tool requirement is only 3 out of 5 because there's a few things that you probably want to get in order to make it a much faster and easier experience. Eating them, you know, there's good things that you can make with them, but I feel like a lot of the time on their own, it isn't the, you know, best thing. It's not something you'd really look forward, or not that you wouldn't look forward to it, but it just isn't the best thing alone. And so I dock it a few points just for that. Not that you can't make very delicious things with acorns. So here is my favorite species of acorn. This is Quercus macrocarpa, which grows, you know, all across eastern North America, which has in the more southern part of its range the largest average size of acorn of any that you'll find in North America. But the trick with acorns is that you need to leach them. Acorns have tannins in them, which are not good for you to eat in large amounts over a long period of time. And in addition, they don't taste good. They're very, very astringent, so they'll have a really drying effect in your mouth, and they're quite bitter as well. So you wouldn't want to, and they wouldn't be good for you anyway. So we need to leach them, and the way that we do that is the tannins are water soluble. So we blend up our acorns and we put them in water, and then the water pulls out some of those tannins. And then we will dump the water, we'll add water back. So every time we are reducing the tannin content in the acorns more and more and more. I'm going to talk more about how to approach this because I think a lot of people misunderstand the way to use acorns from a survival perspective. There's acorn flour that I've gotten from 3 different species of oak trees. And then above me, you know, I said that, you know, the eating might not be good, but a good thing that you can make with acorn flour is cookies, because acorn flour is gluten-free, so it's not going to rise, so it won't give you like a nice fluffy bread like you would make with sourdough with wheat. So for things that are flat, cookies, brownies, pancakes, things like that, acorn can often do a very good job. And of course, these are delicious, but then again, we added chocolate chips and sugar, so it's hard for something not to be good when you add chocolate chips and sugar. Now, the big thing when it comes to acorns is whether or not you have acorns from the red oak group or the white oak group. And people tell you that white oak is better, but for the wrong reasons. So on the left there, the more kind of soft, more rounded lobed one is white oak in general. Soft, round lobes is going to be white oak group. and sharp pointed points on the lobes are going to be red oak group. So that one on the left is Quercus macrocarpa, bur oak from the acorns I showed you earlier, the big ones. And then this one above me is from northern red oak. Now, the reason why white oak is so much better than red oak is because white oak acorns, on average, are much, much higher in starch than they are in fiber. So the main components that you're getting out of acorns when you blend them all up is you're getting an amount of starch and you're getting an amount of fiber. And in my experimentation, when I've done red oak, I will get 13% starch, and then the rest is fiber. And then when it comes to white oak, particularly bur oak, it was like, I think 64% starch, and the rest was fiber. So completely flipped from that. The starch is where all of the calories are and the things that you're looking for. And a big thing that can happen is, depending on the way that you process it, you can actually lose a ton of the starch. And in Korea, where eating acorn is actually still a thing that a lot of people do, like that, you know, it's a general cultural thing and not just like a weird foraging thing, they completely throw out the fiber. They don't even deal with it, which from a calorie perspective is a really smart thing to do, because the fiber is mainly there for structure if you're baking with it or things like that. But if all you care about is calories, then the starch can be obtained much easier. So with that bag right there, I've taken all of my blended up acorns and I'm squeezing it through, and you can see that the color is a little bit cloudy. And it is that way because there's starch coming out with it. So you can easily get out all the starch, and the starch leaches like in 1 or 2 changes of water. White oak starch will also clump at the bottom, so you can really easily pour out all of the tannin water and then fill it back up, and it leaches out in no time. So you can get a ton of starch out of that. I have a series which kind of goes over a bunch of the details on foraging for acorns. It needs an update. I plan on doing that this year, but part 7, which I'm showing right above me right there, will go over the method that I use for how to extract and isolate the starch. So if you're interested in that, then you can check that out. That is also just right here on my YouTube channel. Okay, I'm gonna check a few things here really quick. Okay, I think that everything is going good so far. Yeah, everyone, can you give me a like if everything is looking good on your end? Just want to make sure that the stream is still in a good state as we continue on here. Okay, cool. I see likes coming through. It's kind of like a heartbeat. So awesome. Looks like everything's working correctly. Alrighty. Here's another one of my favorite species to teach from a survival standpoint, hackberry. You can get a tremendous amount of calories from the species for not too much trouble and effort. So the energy payoff can be very, very high from this one. Has a relatively large amount of carbohydrates as well as fats in it. Can be a little bit difficult to process. That's the one thing with it. Along with it can be difficult to gather, but I'll show you some tricks for that. But it preserves totally easy. Like you can pretty much leave it alone. It's going to preserve itself. It doesn't really require a lot of tools. And I put this one in the middle for eating experience, but there's a lot of really great ways that you can make use of it. So here is a range map. These are just screenshots from Gather, my foraging app that I was showing you guys earlier. There's 2 main species that you'll encounter that are used the same way in Eastern North America. We have maybe the hackberry, which is Celtis occidentalis. And then we also have sugarberry, Celtis laevigata. So occidentalis is a bit more of a northern range, not as common where I am in North Alabama. And then sugarberry has more southern distribution, so far more common where I am. Hackberry has more of the classic bark that people think of when they think of hackberry, with the kind of like distinct canyon-like ridges going along it. And then sugarberry has a much more smooth bark overall. Okay, so there's 2 instances where getting hackberry is relatively easy. The easiest one, and the one that I think produces the kind of cleanest final product, is right here where you're at a point in the season where the leaves have started to drop, but that a lot of the berries are still clinging onto the branches. And so when that happens, I get a bucket and I'm literally just kind of stripping them off of the leaves into the bucket. And you can get a lot that way, and I prefer to gather them that way. However, a lot of the time you miss that season, or they are way too tall in the tree in order to get them that way, so they'll fall to the ground. Now, I did a bunch of testing for this, and I found that the fastest way to get them by far was to literally sweep them. I found a nice flat area and I took out a broom and I swept them to gather them. I think it is the first wild food that I have gathered by sweeping, and it worked really well. But you end up with a very kind of like, dirty final, or not dirty final product, but a dirty initial product that you'll need to go through cleaning stages. But in terms of how much you can get from it for your time, very, very efficient. So we talked about winnowing before, and the example that I was showing was with the hackberry. So for that case where you're stripping them from the branches, or if you're sweeping them up, you're going to be getting a lot of debris that will blow off very easily. And that is what I'm doing here. And I didn't mention this before, but winnowing is one of the most satisfying things in the world. Like, I don't know what it is to just be able to, stand there and watch with the bucket as you pour something over and a bunch of stuff that you don't want just flies away. There's something that's just very enjoyable about it. What you get with this, so what I make with them, is I blend them all up, and then I sift them with one of those foraging filters that I showed you, in order to get this kind of sweet, sugary powder. And the flavor is amazing. It's kind of like caramelized, malty. There's a lot of good flavors that come with it. And I'll show you what I use with it in a second. But preserving them is very, very easy. I leave them out to dry, and like I said, they practically dry themselves. And then I just store them in jars, and then I can use them whenever I need to, and they'll keep like that for, I don't know how long. It could be years. I haven't ever tried, but I imagine it would store like this for a very, very long time. Now, cooking with them, so what we typically do is we will kind of, mash them all up into balls. We call them hackberry energy bars, or sometimes I call them hackberry energy balls, whichever one you want to go with. And so we'll combine them along with chopped up hickory nuts or pecan nuts or things like that, add in a little bit of oil, sometimes a little bit of maple syrup or honey, and then pack them all together. And then my wife had the amazing addition of dipping them in a little bit of chocolate after we did that. This was at least my attempt at her idea. She did a better job than what I did. But these taste delicious. They are incredibly filling because those hackberries are filled with a bunch of calories and a bunch of minerals as well that they're very high in. So again, this is a survival food that I look forward to eating every single year, as is the case for many of these. Yeah, someone mentioned that you have to run them through the Vitamix. And by the way, for that one, for hackberry, I have a video which will walk you through, the total process for all this right here on my YouTube channel. Oh, speaking of which, we just hit 500,000 subscribers. So I haven't got a chance to make a post about that or anything. But for all of you who have been a part of this channel for a long time, and for all of you who are new, I just want to say, thank you so much and hello. And I'm looking forward to, our continued journey together on this channel. It's been a really, really great thing for me. It's led me to teaching this class right here, right now. So I'm thankful for all of it. And I'm just really excited about the future and all that is to come with it. So now let's talk about American lotus, which represents so many things for me. I think by far this is my favorite wild food in general, across the board. But it's a tricky one. So let's talk about it. Energy payoff is very high for both the roots and the nuts, and there's different parts of it that you can eat. Very, very energy dense, so 5 out of 5 for that. But processing them can be a huge pain, and I'll talk through that a bit. However, preserving them, I think that of everything we've covered here, they don't even get close to how easily that American lotus seeds can be preserved. So you can quite literally chuck them into a bucket and just forget about them for years, you could hand them to your great grandchildren and they could probably eat them and they'll be just fine and still of good quality. I've tested this at least on the scale of 2 decades. So I took some of them to Sam there that I mentioned earlier, and he had some that he had gathered, I think, 19 years ago, and I had some that I had gathered that year. And we tried them both side by side, couldn't distinguish them in terms of the taste, like identical. So they keep practically forever. Gathering them, as long as you're okay with, being on a canoe and things like that, it's relatively easy, but it does have a bit of an investment of time in order to actually get out there. Once you get out there, you can gather a pretty incredible amount without too much trouble. Requires a fair bit of tools, we'll talk about, and then eating experience, amazing. I think that it's one of just my favorite things to eat. Grocery food, wild food, anything in general. So, 2 things. First off is that when I even mention American lotus, a lot of people are like, I had no idea that America had a native lotus. When you think of lotus, you generally think of East Asia and Asian culture. But yes, America has a native lotus plant. It has always been here, and it's amazing, and I'm really glad that I'm getting to tell you about it right now. So the trick is, if you want to find American lotus and you haven't found it before, when it's flowering is by far the easiest time to spot them. Like, the flowers are very large and they're very showy. And so in my foraging app, you can see right above here, and this is probably for like, where did I put it for? I can't remember where I set the location to. I'm changing it all the time for testing. So, when you get the app, it'll tell you where it's flowering for your location, as well as when the fruit timing is. So that this gets in the concept of what I call flower scouting, which we'll talk about with another species, where it's way easier a lot of time to find a thing when it's flowering compared to when it's fruiting. Because when this thing is in its seed stage, it isn't quite as easily to spot it. And there is the range on the far left, pretty much all of Eastern North America, and some of those scatter bits are getting into parts where, it is growing in water. It's an aquatic plant. There are multiple different parts of it that you can eat. So one of the ones that is most well known would be the root. Now, if you had an area where you could plant it, I think that it would do really, really good, and you could gather it relatively easily. What I have found in wild settings, it's quite difficult to just gather the root. They're delicious and amazing. They taste just like potatoes. One thing that we make with them is little fries. We make them the way that you would make French fries, and I joke that they're like waffle fries, so wild waffle fries. But they're a little bit difficult. So the part, jump scare. For any of you that have trypophobia, close your eyes for a moment. I'm told that this photo will bug people like that. Okay, and I'll let you know when you can open your eyes in a second. So here's what the seed heads look like. And these seed heads, which are starting to turn a little bit kind of bluish gray, are a bit more on the mature end. This is showing you kind of like the spectrum of maturity that the seeds will go through. So they begin green, and they turn a little bit brownish, and then more brown, and then they go a bit kind of bluish gray until eventually they turn more of a, chocolatey brown again. So that this is probably representing about 3 weeks, 28 days or so of maturity of the seeds. Now, in terms of the easiest to gather that doesn't really require a lot of tools or anything like that, you'd want to get them at the green stage. At the green stage, you get them like this, and then you can pop all of those out of the seed head. And then a trick that a friend of mine showed me at the Wild Harvest Festival, which happens in Wisconsin every year, is that then you can just take those and you can put them into like steamed boiling water, and there's a coating on it, and it will rupture and pop, and then you can remove them. So these are with the shell of the individual nut removed, and that is a very, very delicious, vegetable, fruit, whatever you want to call it. Tastes a lot like corn, and just in general, in terms of the macronutrient breakdown, is high in both. Is very, very high in protein relative to a bunch of other wild things that you find. So this is a really good protein source in addition to all the other things that it's good for. So, like I mentioned, gathering them can be, it isn't too difficult once you actually get out there, but then, it's just a matter of getting out there. A lot of them you can gather from the shore. We typically go out and we gather them with a canoe. So here just showing you, this was, I think we spent, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 hours gathering that much. Like we practically filled up a canoe right there. If I were to devote a whole day to it, I would not be surprised that we could actually gather, 2 or 3 canoefuls of this stuff. And the fastest way that we found to do this is to not try to gather it from in the canoe, but to actually hop out of the canoe. We'll put on waders or things like that and just wade through the kind of lotus forest and picking them by hand. And you can gather, as you can see, a ton of them that way. So then here they are at the fully mature stage, and I'm going to be sharing a video this year on how to go through the process of getting them when they're fully mature. It requires a bit more work and a bit more tools, but what you end up with in the end is really, really fantastic. So I'm working on some tools in order to make this easier for everyone, and I'll be sharing more about this throughout the year. But one of our favorite things to do with this is we'll grind them up, and then we'll use a sifter. Here I think it was with a general kitchen sifter, but I also use the ones that I mentioned earlier from that set. And then what we make with it is that product right there, which is what we call lotus bread. And we joke it's kind of like cornbread, but I think that more accurately, cornbread is more like lotus bread. Because cornbread, most recipes actually make it with 50-50 cornmeal and wheat. With lotus bread, what you're seeing right there in that crumb is 100% lotus flour. No wheat at all whatsoever. And there's no gluten in it. So I don't even know exactly what it is that gives it that crumb and that like slight amount of rise. But I think like even if you're just gluten free and you want a good wheat flour alternative, lotus flour is the way to go. I think it is the best non-wheat flour for baking fluffy products that you can find, better than any of the other gluten-free alternatives that you'll get at the grocery store. So I'm always singing the praises of American Lotus, and I will continue to do so. And like I mentioned, I have more resources about it that will be coming up this year. Okay. And by the way, if you close your eyes for the trypophobia, you can open them now. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. Okay, we are at, we've been going for about an hour now, and I have, let's see, I think 4 species left. So if you want to stick around, then I'll just be going through the rest of these. These are some of my favorites. And we've been, in terms of the kind of like survival value, we've been kind of going up as we go along. So the more that we get into them, the more valuable, in my opinion, some of these are becoming. And hickory is one of the top. So thank you all for joining me for this, and we're gonna keep on going through the rest of these. And yeah, if you can't, then like I mentioned, the recording that will be sent after this will have all of this anyway. Okay, very cool. It looks like a lot of people are sticking around. So yeah, like I mentioned, only better information is coming, in my opinion, in terms of viable wild food species for calories. Because hickory is amongst some of the best. So hickory, relative to many other things, is very, very high in fats. Fats is calories. Calories is good. So we like that. So the energy payoff is 5 out of 5. Processing can be relatively straightforward with hickory, easier than you might think. A lot of people think about hickory in the wrong way, and I'll show you how I think it is best thought of. Preserving is pretty good. Better than average. It isn't perfect because a lot of times you may want to refrigerate the final product of what you get, and anywhere that you require refrigeration or freezing or things like that, I'm going to dock points from it. Gathering is relatively straightforward. Tools, there's one tool that will help you out a lot with it, but in general there aren't too many. Eating experience, easy 5 out of 5. One of my favorite foods in general. So for the ranges of hickory, there's a bunch of different species, and I picked 4 of the more common ones, but in the app we have even more species than just this. And you can see that they pretty well cover, all of Eastern North America, even, way down into Florida as well. So the ones I'm showing here are shagbark hickory, pecan, which is a hickory, pignut hickory, and bitternut hickory. Bitternut will be important. We'll get to that one a bit more in a second. Some of them have very shaggy bark. That would be mainly shagbark hickory and shellbark hickory. And then others have more tight bark, but they tend to have kind of a interweaving bark, despite, whatever species that it might be. Some of them also, they keep the husk on when you gather them, and other ones like this one above me, the husk will fall off or will fall off relatively easily. So this one where the husk remains on is pignut, and then this one where it has fallen off is shellbark. Shellbark is the largest hickory nut of all the hickories that we have, I say in the world, but hickory diversity is most in Eastern North America anyway, so it's not really saying much. But then here's another fun photo, which is showing a bunch of different species that I've gathered. And the big trick with hickory that is showcased right above me is that many of them are incredibly difficult to actually remove the nut meat from the inner shell. And you can see this one is mocker nut above me. And the trick with mocker nut is that the shell is super duper thick. So you think like, oh, the nut's gonna be really big, I'm gonna get a lot of like nut meat out of it, but then you don't. And then as well, you see that there's kind of a lot of these chambers in it. Same thing for the one in the middle, which is pignut. That is just gonna make for a really difficult time of actually getting it out of the shell. The one on the far right is actually shagbark, and you can see that of the three, it has the least amount of chambering. So of those, it would be the easiest to actually get out, nut pieces to eat, like pecan or walnut or things from the grocery store. But for most of them, and also like just in general from a calorie efficiency perspective, it's not worth your time to try to do that. And this is something that the Native Americans that lived in Eastern North America did as well. They're like, this is not worth the time. We're just going to pound everything up all together, and we're going to, cook it all as one. Because unlike black walnut, the shells of hickory aren't distasteful. There's nothing wrong with like, putting them to have in something that you'll ultimately eat, which will be sifted. You're not actually eating the shells. That'd be very bad. They're very hard. But if you had it, let's say in, you'll find it in a moment. One thing to call out here, this is an old photo from when I was first experimenting with it. Don't use a plastic blender for this. Very bad idea. This is a recipe for inoculating your body with a ton of microplastics. Because after doing this, I noticed that there's a ton of like tiny chips that are happening in this blender right here. So don't do that. It's also probably going to break the blender before too long. Get the stainless steel canister or any stainless steel canister or metal. Don't use plastic. It will not go well. But when I do this, I use stainless steel. I put hearing protection on. I press the on button at the highest speed. It blends them all up. And then I move on. And so far, so good. So hopefully that'll keep on happening that way. But then what we do with them is we put everything together into water and we boil it. And this is going to make, what we would just generally refer to as hickory milk. And it is very, very high in fats especially, but as well protein and carbohydrates. So just everything that we're looking for, it has them. And you see I've kind of like lifted up. That is stuff from the bottom. So for the most part, all of the, shell bits and whatnot sink to the bottom. And then you can skim off the liquid on top, which has all the good stuff that we're looking for. I believe it's a Cherokee word for this drink is knuchi. Sometimes it refers to the drink itself, and sometimes it refers to where they would use the hickory milk, and then they would cook wild rice or things with it. So I've seen it used both ways. And everything about it is amazing. In terms of, I really feel like we're getting into the staple wild food realm, because in terms of a food that provided calories to the people living in North America, this has been one of the most important foods for the entire history of North America. And it's a relatively modern, post-colonial thing where it's not an important thing, where most of us are not having, hickory in our diet. So I hope that it's something that we can bring back. Special mention to bitternut hickory. And by the way, everything that I mentioned with the hickory milk is covered on my YouTube channel in a video there. So another thing with, there's a special mention for bitternut hickory. And you'd think like, why would we be interested in bitternut hickory? because the nuts are bitter. And indeed, they are bitter. They're quite bitter and they're quite astringent. And I don't have very good photos of this, I apologize, but one thing that you might kind of see here is that the shells of bitternut hickory are actually very, very thin. In fact, they're even thinner than most pecans. So bitternut hickory is I think, one of, if not the thinnest shelled hickory of the bunch. And while it is bitter, it is also the highest in oil content. So this is not something that's very easy to do for an individual, although you can try it. You can try to boil it and skim the oil off the top of the water. But this is where we get into the realm of kind of community investment. So this is an expeller press for oil. And you can use bitternut hickory for getting out a pure oil. And the bitter compounds are not oil soluble. So what you actually get out of it is no longer bitter. And here is one that I have ordered from my friend Jed. And this largely was kind of introduced to the world through the teacher that I mentioned earlier. His name is Sam Thayer. So at this moment, I just wanted to, give a big thanks to Sam for, really pioneering the commercial viability of bitternut hickory as an oil. And really, I think we should all be upset that this is not a bigger industry in Eastern North America. Because, this is something that really could be as big as olive oil is in Greece and the Mediterranean region. It's not something we have to import from somewhere else. And another aspect of it is that you can, grow out the stand of bitternut hickory trees, which support a whole myriad of other native insects and animals from our region, and at the same time be getting a tremendous amount of calories out from it. And there are a few more entities that are doing more research on this, and I'm really thankful for that. So, maybe I will be able to see a world where my grandchildren can get hickory oil from the supermarket, and that I think would be one of the coolest things in the world. So I wanted to mention this to you so you were all aware of it, that this is an incredible area for community level investment that you could be getting. You can't get any more energy dense than pure oil. There's so much potential here that I wanted you all to be aware of. Okay, and then we're getting into the final ones here. So black walnut. This is one of my favorite wild foods of all time. And if you think you don't like black walnuts, if you tried them before, there might be one thing that I can help you with in regards to that. So energy payoff, again, is very high. One of the great things about black walnut, again, very, very high in protein. So from plant sources, it's often a very difficult thing to do. So huge energy payoff in that regard. Processing, pretty difficult with this one, again. Preserving is not too bad. You can gather a bunch of them very easily. You're never going to be limited in terms of how many you can gather. It's always going to be how many can you actually process. And I would give the eating experience 5 out of 5, but a lot of people don't like it, so I dock it 1 point for that. But the big thing is that you end up with those husks there on the left. So on the left is a black walnut nut with the husk still on it. And then this one is with the husk removed, where it is just a shell now. So the trick is getting those husks off. Most of the trick. Then there's more after that. There are 2 species that broadly fall into this category that you'll be able to use relatively the same way. The first one is, of course, black walnut with the largest range. Again, pretty much just all of Eastern North America is its range. And then on the left there, I'm also showing the range for butternut, sometimes called white walnut, which is more of a northern species. And to me, it looks like black walnut, but it's more football shaped, so more elongated and less spherical. I use this tool right here, a nut roller, for gathering black walnut, and I can gather, if I wanted to, I could gather, 2,000 plus black walnuts easily, without any issue. But I can't process 2,000 at this point in time, unfortunately, so I don't gather that many. But I'm never limited with how many that I can gather with this nut roller right here. And this is one of the tools that I'll be including in the resources that I'm sending to all of you. So de-hulling is the trick. And you don't have to do it this way, but what I found was if I'm getting into the realm of hundreds of black walnuts, the easiest way to de-hull them with tools is with basically a paint mixer. So here you're actually seeing all of these holes in a big trash can. or trash bin, I guess I should say. And then I'm using a corded power drill with a paint mixer, and I'm blending it all up. And it makes this soup, and you just kind of wait there for everything to disintegrate, and then all the holes eventually just kind of fall right off. It's pretty amazing. Then, so the reason why I think a lot of people think that they don't like black walnut is because they may have had uncured black walnut. So uncured black walnut tastes very much like paint. Sharpie would be the terms that we might use. But then when you cure them, all those flavors tend to go away, and then these other really amazing notes, like people have said that it tastes kind of like apple to me, which I agree with. And I don't know, it's hard to describe. Like, it's a very, very unique flavor, but all the good stuff comes out when you cure them, when you just leave them out to dry in open air in the shells. And then after that, you crack them. Jump scare. This is not a zombie holding the black walnuts. That's actually my hands that were after when I did a bunch of processing, and they will dye your skin, and they can make your skin feel a little bit sensitive too. So you might want to wear gloves to avoid having zombie hands like I did in this instance. But in my area, most of the black walnuts that I find are like the ones on the left, where the shell is incredibly thick, and if I were going to crack that with a hammer, it would be a difficult time. Sometimes you can find them. This is actually a cultivated black walnut with a very, very thin shell, where it'll be, pretty easy to crack them no matter what you're dealing with. But because in my area, many of them are thick-shelled, I use this tool right here, which is called Grandpa's Goody Getter Nutcracker. And I bought mine, I think 3 years ago now, and I've never looked back. It cracks them very precisely, very accurately, in a very repeatable way. So you don't need a whole lot of skill to do this, and no matter how thick the shells are, it does an amazing job with them. So it's an investment. I think it's probably about $160 or so. But I have a code there. I'll send this to you in the resources, Feral24. That will get you $10 off for that. And that gives me a little bit commission for the purchase. This is another, American small business. They're made in America. They will last until you give them to your great grandchildren. You can keep passing it down in your family. And compared to all the other products that are available on the market, it's just so much better than all of them. And they're not paying me to say that. I am getting commission, but I'm just a really big believer in the work that they do. So I always give them a shout out when they pop up. Okay, now we're getting to what I think is, in terms of just like, wild, generally available to most people, right off the tree, like good to go, chestnut, I think is the king. So energy payoff again is very high. This is one's very, very high in carbohydrates and a very easily digestible form of carbohydrates. They are relatively straightforward to process. Preserving them is also relatively easy. Sometimes they need to be refrigerated if you grind them all the way down into a flour, but if you leave them in shell, they can be left for a pretty long time. Gathering them is pretty easy. I'll tell you about a trick for them in a second. Don't really require any tools, and I think that eating them is delicious. So the thing with chestnut is there is one, kind of two, very, very easy times to find them. You see there in the photo on the left that there's a bunch of the white plumes in the tree. That is when the tree is flowering. Wild chestnuts, or in these cases like feral chestnuts, are very, very easy to find when they're flowering. Like, you can spot them from really, really far away, and it's one of the first trees of the year to flower. As well, when they are like in the green stage, they're kind of like bright lime green. They're pretty easy to spot at that point in time too. So, like I mentioned for the other ones, both the flower time and the fruit time are things that you'll find in the app. And you can set notifications for all these to let you know like when the important time is to look for them. And again, always tailor to your area. The one pest that you need to look out for, like many other nuts, this is true for hickory and acorn as well, is a nut weevil. Chestnuts have no tannin in them, or practically no tannin in them if they have a small amount. So they are often the target of weevils. So just one thing you want to look out for: if you see a hole in your chestnut, that was one that a weevil got into, and it probably would not be one that you would want to eat because it ate and it pooped in there, and probably not something that would be very good for us to eat. Okay, so harvesting, another one where I haven't recorded photos from where I'm like really intentionally going out and I'm gathering like every last bit that I can. But whenever I've gone, I'm always gathering more than what I need at that point in time easily. A trick with them, so they have a very very spiky hole, and this guy showed this to me a couple years ago. You get a PVC pipe and you cut it at about like a 45-degree angle or so, and you take the pipe and you just press it in the middle of the husk with the nuts, and the nuts will pop right out of the husk when you do that. It can be quite difficult to try to open it up with your hands because the spikes on the exterior are very, very, very sharp. Like you'd need like relatively thick leather gloves in order to avoid that, and even then they can still stab you. So that is an easy trick for gathering a bunch of them relatively quickly. And then the two things that we will often do with them. So the first one is to just, roasted chestnuts. And it was funny, when we gathered a bunch of them the first time, I'd never had chestnuts before. And I thought, oh my gosh, like we just gathered all this. Is this even going to be any good? Turns out, yeah, they're delicious. They're amazing. It's one of my favorite things to gather and just eat, again, wild food or not. But then another one, I don't have any photos of this, so I got one from Alan Burgo, Forager chef. Shout out to him. He has a great website about a bunch of wild food cooking. He has a really good article about making flour from the chestnuts, which was something that is done historically throughout Italy, and it's a very important flour culturally to them. And there's a ton of different things that you can do with chestnut flour, especially again for making things that aren't going to rise, like desserts, cookies, brownies, and things like that. There is a lookalike to chestnut. At least it largely comes just from a confusion of the name, but these nuts right here, and this is called horse chestnut, which is not a true chestnut, and then these are true chestnut. So the easiest way to distinguish them, the lookalike does not have a spiky hole. If you can grab it with your bare hand, it is not chestnut. Chestnuts always have a very, very spiky hole. But then this was a point where I wanted to mention lookalikes, and comparing lookalikes is a very, very important feature that we spent a lot of time with when we were developing the app. And here are a few more screenshots from the app for the lookalike comparison for horse chestnut versus true chestnut. In the app, we call it Buckeye. Another name for horse chestnut is Buckeye. So seeing that, one has simple leaves and then one is compound, that they have two very different flowers. And for every species that we have in the app, we have this lookalike guide. So if there are lookalikes for it, then we include those, and we have photos that you can use for side-by-side comparison, whether it is wild carrot or chestnut or sumac or, all of them. So, excuse me, I'm going to have a sip of water right here. And Buckeye or horse chestnut are toxic without processing. There may be a process you can go through to render them edible, but I don't know much about it, so I won't try to speak to that now. That is outside of my current realm of experience, but something that I want to experiment with in the future. Okay, I've got four, sounds like a lot, but these are four quick ones that I want to run through that are now getting into the realm of like heavy staples that I think would be really good for all of us to be investing more time in. First one is maple. And yeah, maple syrup. A lot of us don't think about this as wild food, but maple syrup is maybe the most purchased wild food from the grocery store. Most maples aren't really cultivated or anything like that. They're just the maple, the same ones that you and I encounter all the time. Energy payoff, it's sugar syrup, sugar water, so very, very high. But it is, of course, like there's a lot of things you have to go through for, actually processing it and getting it to this point that you see right here. This is maple syrup that I just got. I was at a conference and Sam was there. So this is one that he made. And Tim, who I think was in the chat, he might still be, maybe actually helped with making this one. And we'll see more from Tim in a second. But eating experience, easily 5 out of 5. What more can I say about maple syrup? We all love maple syrup. In terms of, identifying them and recognizing them, it's the maple leaf, the Canadian flag, a very recognizable species. All species of maple or Acer species can be used to to get the sap in order to make maple syrup. Some produce more sugar in the sap than others, so sugar maple being the highest of them. And there's tons of resources about maple that you could look up online, thankfully, to learn more about this. But if you were doing it more at an at-home setting, these are photos from my friend Tim Clemens, Ironwood Foraging Company. He goes by MN. Oh, gotta get out of the way. MN Forager, Minnesota Forager on Instagram and online. And thank you for sending me these photos, Tim. So here's just a easy at-home setup where they have these tray setup where they're evaporating off the maple sap in order to make maple syrup at home. So it's definitely something that you can do. I haven't had a chance to do it before, and probably, I don't have exact numbers on this, but probably north of Kentucky, if I had to guess, is where this becomes more viable. So in my area, more in the southeast, we just don't get the weather pattern that produces a heavy sap run the way that you do further north. So one that is available for, the northern friends of mine that are joining this class today. But, one that you can certainly get a tremendous amount of calories from every single year. This is foraging, in my opinion. This is foraging. And then wild rice. So when Sam teaches about wild rice, what he says is that you are not going to find a more energy effective wild food that remains energy effective without the use of modern tools and without any cultivation. It is really, really, truly incredible in that regard. Energy payoff, it's rice. 5 out of 5. Like, very easy to eat, very easy to enjoy, very easy to digest. Also very easy to preserve. Keep it in a jar and, a sealed jar, and you're good to go. Gathering and processing, however, are both a bit more difficult, but that doesn't mean that if you invest all the time and energy towards it and you gather enough of it, that it is not a incredible energy payoff. So, I've mentioned Sam a couple times in the class already, and I want to say once again that these photos that I'm taking here were from a time where Sam took me out and taught me how to do wild rice. So I'm incredibly thankful for that and for all the work that he's done. And one more time, I'll mention his book right here. If you don't have this book, especially if you're new to foraging, and you want a book, this is the book to get. You will not be able to beat this book. I don't know that we're going to see a better foraging field guide for, 3-4 decades. I just can't imagine a better one coming out than this one. So you gather wild rice from a canoe, and so here's 2 shots of me out there with Sam. So you have one person who is poling that is going through, and then you have another person that is knocking. So they're taking the rice and they're knocking it into the canoe. Here is a canoe. This was my first time going out, so I think for an experienced wild ricer, they would get way, way more than what I'm getting right here, or what I got right here. But yeah, you're knocking the rice into the canoe. And I will just mention that Sam has a really good TikTok video, which will go into a lot more detail than I can, and he knows way more about this than I do. But I'm just wanting to mention this to you guys so that you're even aware that this is a thing that you could do. So then after that, you put it over a fire in this pot, and you're stirring it around, and you're trying to get the chaff on the exterior of the rice kernel to become brittle, basically. Then you go through a process that is often referred to as dancing the rice, where we put it into this barrel and we put on like moccasins or shoes or things like that, and you're stepping on the rice over and over, and you're grinding those kernels past each other, which is going to break away all the chaff and break it up until the chaff is completely broken up and detached from the kernels for the most part, and then comes my favorite part, as you can see on the left, which is winnowing. So from that point, you're just literally the chaff is blowing off in the wind, and you're ending up with the rice after that. And when I was there visiting Sam, like literally, he showed me 5-gallon buckets full of wild gathered home processed wild rice, and I think that's just the coolest thing in the world. And that when people think of foraging, they don't think of that, But I kind of see that, to me, that's kind of like my ultimate goal of foraging, is to get to the point where I am creating more and more 5-gallon buckets filled with wild food. That's the goal, for me at least. Okay, all of the species that we covered are like purely wild, largely non-cultivated species, where maybe if we do some type of cultivation, we can improve them, but they really don't need it. The next two that I'm going to show you, which are the last two, really require some amount of cultivation, and thankfully that has been done. And I just feel like I'd be missing out, or I'd be leaving out so much if I didn't include these for all of you right now. So, the first one, I had a mistake there. Chufa is not Zania. I think I got the scientific name right after that. Chufa is Cypress esculenta. So, just a mistake there on the species. So chufa is the name of this plant. Chufa is a sedge, so it's it's closely related to grasses. Energy power for this one, again, very, very high. They're easy to process, relatively easy to preserve, relatively easy to gather, don't require a lot of tools, and they taste pretty good too. So in a wild setting, those right there are the chufa. I guess they'd be the roots, but they're often called chufa nuts. But they're not actually nuts; they're actually a storage organ of the plant. So this is what they kind of look like in the wild. In fact, they're a very weedy. They're often referred to as invasive. There is debate as to whether or not they're actually invasive in North America, or if they're non-native to North America. I am of the mind that they are native to North America. And there's an idea that they, maybe literally floated across the ocean from Africa into North America very, very long time ago. So, for me, effectively, I consider them a native species to North America. But yeah, if you look up this plant, you're going to find a bunch of information about controlling it with herbicide and things like that, because for most people, it's just a weedy, aggressive plant that they don't want. And again, it kind of grows like this in a weedy setting. So in the wild form, you can see right there on the bottom, those are going to be the chufa nuts, which are what we are after. They also grow very aggressively via rhizome in their wild form. And in the wild, it's going to be pretty slim pickings going after them. You're probably going to be spending a lot more energy trying to get them than you are getting out of them. But there are varieties that you can buy that grow way, way more vigorously in terms of producing these little nutlets at the bottom there that I feel like fits into this class, because you just like plant them and then you forget about them and they're going to do their thing. And the cool thing about this one, which is from Strictly Medicinal, and I'll put this in the resources too of where we get them from, is that they are not rhizomatous and they don't seed very frequently. So if you want to grow them in a controlled setting and just leave them to do their thing, you can get them whenever you need to, and you can get a food that is filled with tons of fats, incredible amount of fats, and protein, and carbohydrates, then this is a good one to do that with. So we're leaning a bit more into the realm of, past ecoculture into, homesteading or whatnot, but I just felt like I needed to include it for this class. And the thing that you make with this, so if you've ever heard of the dessert drink horchata, traditionally that was made with chufa. Literally I got the photos for this today because I wanted to make it, because I didn't have photos for the class. And you begin with soaking them. We left this to soak in the fridge overnight. And then you blend them up, add a little bit of sweetener to taste, and then you cook it. And the starches in there make it thicken up, and it is... I pretty much had only this for lunch, and I haven't had dinner yet. So I'm still running on the horchata that I made earlier today, and very sweet, very energy dense, very rewarding thing to eat, and extremely easy to grow. So to me, it fits right in as like a wild cultivated food is what I would call it. Along with, we can't have this class without talking about sunchoke, right? Helianthus tuberosus. Commonly called Jerusalem artichoke, and another name for it would be sunroot. But it is not from Jerusalem, and it is not an artichoke. It is a sunflower, Helianthus. So Helianthus, I think it's annuus, is the cultivated sunflower, the one that you would get sunflower seeds from, that you would see the big flower head from. And it's in the same group as that one. But what we get from this is not from the flower, but actually from the root, the tuber. Energy payoff for this one is very high. And I'll show you an important thing about cooking it in a second. Processing it is, relative. I mean, it's pretty much just cooking it. Preservation, you would need maybe a root cellar or something like that. But a big thing with it is that you can kind of just leave it to grow, and you can gather it, as needed. As long as it's more in the dormant time. You wouldn't want to gather it in the middle of its growing time. Doesn't need any tools. Eating it is very good, in my opinion. So this is how you might find it and what it would look like. It has these very pretty yellow flowers, which just look kind of like a miniaturized sunflower, where the middle has just become a lot smaller, and the ray flowers that are along the outside are much larger relative to the middle. So they often grow in that very clumped up form that you see right there, and they produce a edible rhizome. Now, similar to the chufa that we mentioned, if you were to try to gather them from the wild, this one I think is more viable as a wild food, but it's not going to produce some of the tubers that you may have seen other people share about online. And even this one, so this is from a cultivated one, which is made to kind of grow in a potato-like shape. That is pretty small for what you can generally find of the sunchoke tuber to be. Like my fist size easily or larger is an average size you'll find. So there's that photo that we saw from earlier where we're growing them in our garden. And I don't think I've ever watered these one time. I don't think I've ever paid attention to them. They just do their thing. So for a lot of these plants, these last two that I mentioned, plus a bunch of the other ones too, you get them planted, forget about them, and then return to them when you need them, right? And that is you kind of teaming up with nature. These things are native to our area. They are adapted to our area. They thrive here. They don't need a lot of care, a lot of attention, but they can still provide you with a tremendous amount of calories and energy for you not having to put too much energy in to maintaining them. So that is what this is all about. And I hope you guys didn't mind me mentioning these two that I felt had to be included along with all the other wild foods that are a bit more wild on the, wild to cultivated spectrum. So those are all the species, everybody. I hope that you learned a lot from this. I'm going to switch to this one. Like I mentioned, these free classes that I do are made possible by the users of my app. So if you are a user of my app watching this, then thank you so much. Again, not a big company. This is my app that I made for you to learn foraging with. And if you use that QR code, if you just scan it right now, or if you go to the link in the description, then it will give you a free month-long trial. If you do it the normal way, just download the app. It'll be 2 weeks. But if you use my links, then it will give you a free month to try it out to see if it is valuable to you. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm sorry that I ran a little bit long. I should have seen that coming. I typically do that. But I thank you all for your time, for paying attention to this class. Please share it with someone else near you, a neighbor, a friend, someone else in Eastern North America. The more people that know about this, the more people that have this knowledge, the better. If you have a ton of food and your neighbor is starving, that's way worse than if you have a lot of food and your neighbor has a lot of food. That, the more of us that know this stuff, the better. So it becomes more valuable the more that we share it. So yes, thank you all so much. And I'm going to switch over to the questions right now. And I'm going to get through as many of them as I can. I'll probably stick around for 15 minutes or so, at least answering your questions. But thank you guys so much. And I appreciate all the comments. I'm reading them now. And you guys are awesome. You guys are awesome. Okay, let's go to the questions. See how many that I missed. I missed a lot. Okay, let me start going through these. So first question is about bur oaks, and they're wondering if that'll work the same for the acorn processing. Yes, it will. In fact, it'll work tremendously. I think bur oak is the ideal oak for processing acorns for either the flower where you're combining the fiber and the starch, or just the starch. Live oaks, I haven't experimented with before. I imagine would be pretty good, but I don't know for sure. So you'll have to try that, and you'll have to tell me how it goes and how much starch you get out of it. And someone's asking about the hackberries that they found are really sparse. Do they have a mast? I do think that they have a bit of a masting behavior. I haven't observed that like for sure, but like a big thing that I found is that some areas they're growing better, they have a bit more sun or whatever it might be, and they're fruiting much more than they would in other areas that I find them. So I find some areas where there's like tons and tons of hackberries and they're growing very abundantly, and others where they aren't. I don't have a PDF. Someone's asking, but I do have that kind of resources link that I'm going to send that can be a companion to this class. Later in the week, I'll be sending that to you guys. And the name of the app someone was asking is called Gather the Foraging app. So just use that link, or if you search for Gather Foraging in your app store, it should pop up. Someone was asking, when you're processing in a blender, how do you determine if they have a worm resident? So it depends on what you were asking about there. For pretty much everything, I'm cracking them and checking them before I throw them in with the blender. So whether it's hickory nuts, I'm checking for there being a weevil or there being a bad nut before I throw it in with everything else. And this is all covered in a video. Same thing for acorns. I have to crack it and remove it from the shell before I put it in. So it's usually pretty obvious that there was a worm in there. The nut is going to look bad, have a hole in it, have bits of debris in it or things like that. So there's usually a lot of ways to tell. How long do I cure my black walnuts for? I usually cure them for about at least 3 weeks. Usually more, but at least 3 weeks. And one person was asking, like, how do you use the app? Do you use it to take pictures, to identify things? And you don't. So a big thing that we decided in the initial development of the app is that we weren't, at least right now, we're not going to include like, AI identification of stuff. In large part because there's a lot of apps that do a great job of that already, and we wouldn't be able to do any better of a job than those could. So the one that we recommend for that is iNaturalist. But the purpose of the app that I made is kind of approaching things from a different direction. So like you open the app, let's do it right now. You open the app. Oh, can we see it? Yep. Right. And then you can scroll through like, so it's like, hey, here you are in your area. This one is for Nashville and it's April. So here are the things that you can be looking for right now. And then we can click on a thing like mulberry should be there. Yep. So we've got like, mulberry, and then now we can learn more about mulberry. And, there's a ton of extra information. We do have a foraging journal that is free for everyone to use. You don't need to have a subscription for that whatsoever. And with that, you can log things, but still, at least right now, doesn't do any of the AI photo recognition type stuff. Can silver maple be used for syrup? I believe it can, although I don't know that for certain. I don't know about Japanese maple either, but I think that the general large maple trees can be used. Some of them just produce more sugar in the syrup or more sugar in the sap than others do, so you'll get more actual syrup out of it, and less of it would just be water. What does chufa taste like? It tastes very almondy to me. Would be the closest thing that I can think of. So yeah, I think like kind of like a sweet, rich almond, like a milky almond, maybe is the way of describing it. Yeah, it's often hard to describe a lot of these flavors for me. And someone said, can you do a video on pawpaw? I do plan on doing a video of pawpaw this year. Oh yeah, and now I'm switching back to the live chat again. And yeah, I was talking about AI with the photo recognition, but the other thing that I really want to mention is that there's no AI whatsoever in the information in the app as well. And there are actually a few out there that are like kind of like foraging related that clearly are using AI for the information. And I don't know about you, I don't want to learn anything about foraging that, you know, a machine just generated and no human checked. And Foraging is stealing information and content from so many authors. Sam being the biggest one. If you look up his first book, which is, where is it? Yeah. So unfortunately, if you look up his first book, The Forager's Harvest, and you just look that up on Amazon, you're going to be given literally, maybe at this point, hundreds of crap AI books along with it that are like Forager's Harvest Bible, Forager's Harvest Journey, whatever, like where they're trying to like hijack that title. So yeah, not a big fan of that use of AI. So, you know, all the information that we get is human generated, human powered, and we work with many other humans, and we pay a lot of other humans in order to, you know, get that knowledge and information into the app. Is there a way to make bitternut hickory less bitter? I think the answer would be to extract the oil from it because you won't be getting the bitter compounds in the oil. But in terms of the actual like nut meat, I don't think that you'd be able to get the bitterness out of it. Same thing like, you know, with acorns, you have to like pull the bitterness from it with the water. Although I don't know that you could do that with the hickory. It probably wouldn't be worth. I don't know. It's a good question. I wonder if you could leach bitternut hickory. Well, then you run into the trouble of, you have the shell with it too. It just probably wouldn't be worth the effort, if I had to guess. Okay, any more questions come in? Yeah, so how do you remove the husks from hickory where the husks stay on? I just do an extra crack. So if I have like pignut hickory or something, I'll, you know, whatever I'm cracking it on, whether it's the good getter or a hammer, crack, remove the husk, and then crack to get out of the shell. So that is another, you know, consideration of pignut hickory being a bit more work than shagbark hickory would be. It does require one additional crack for what you're going through in order to get it to the stage where you can turn it into hickory milk. Hector is asking, do you focus your attention more towards the eastern side of the country? I do, in terms of like the videos that I do and everything. But then in terms of the app, you know, we work with other people and we have made sure to cover, as of right now, all of America and all of Canada is covered by the app. Can the oil press be used to press black walnut oil? I don't know that a like semi-commercial press could be. Like, I know that there is a way to do it because Hammond's, which actually commercially processes a ton of black walnut, they make an oil, but I don't know how they do it. So it is possible. I just don't know how. I don't know if it would be a viable thing to do, you know, in an at-home or like even a community scale operation. It might require a bit more of commercial investment in order for that to be a viable thing. All right, everyone, I'm going to stick around for maybe about 5 more minutes or so. So drop those questions if you're still hanging out here, and I'll answer them. And then, yeah, in about 5 minutes, I'm going to get ready for bed, I think. Probably something that I should be doing. Someone's asking, is the bark good for tea of hickory? It can be, yeah. And one thing with the bark is that you can actually use it as a base flavoring to make syrup with. So that is something that is very, very good. Same thing of how you use the bark for smoking. those same compounds which we find to taste very good can be pulled out by making tea with it and then adding sugar in order to make what I would consider smoked hickory bark syrup. Not a true syrup, didn't come from the tree, but gets the job done in the end. It tastes very, very good. It gives me a feeling that I have like a tree syrup, down here in the South that I can't get the way that they do in the North. So at least there's that. Oh, good question that someone asked. What do you use to repel ticks when you forage? I use a chemical called permethrin. Some people are a bit apprehensive of that, but if I am more worried about Lyme disease than I am worried about, permethrin, which is a relatively well-studied pesticide. So when it's dried on your clothes or on your shoes, mainly I spray it on my shoes, if there are negative effects to me, they're not as bad as getting Lyme disease. So I do use permethrin when I go out in the wild. Yeah, some people not like it, but I have not found anything natural to work nearly anywhere close to as good as permethrin does. What's the best way to gather shagbark hickory nuts? Squirrels always beat me to what's fallen on the ground. Yeah, that is a trick. So the first thing would be like if you can find shagbark hickory in an area where squirrels can't do as well, that'd be one thing. So like in an open field, squirrels have a much more difficult time because they have to avoid getting picked up by a hawk or a predatory bird. So that'd be, maybe you're foraging for them in an area where squirrels have a lot more cover, and naturally they're going to have a lot more pressure on the hickory nuts. But then, the other part would just be to like, really be on them, paying attention. Generally, for me, I'll find a few trees that I'm like really keep my eye on. And once they start dropping, I'll be going out as often as I can to be picking them up in order to store them and process them for the rest of the year. Preferred wood for smoking meat. I really love the flavor of white oak. But then after that, hickory is hard to beat, in my opinion. All right, one last check of the questions. Do you have a calorie content for each of the wild edibles? I don't explicitly, but for many of them, you'll be able to look them up on like USDA. Is it USDA? Yeah, USDA. I think if you look up like black walnut, I know does. Lotus does as well. Like black walnut nutritional facts, or American lotus, or just lotus nutritional facts, or hickory nutritional facts. A lot of the ones that I mentioned, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the ones that I mentioned, you'll be able to find, macronutrient breakdown of all of them. How often will these classes be given? I'll probably do maybe another one or two this year. I'm trying to do more. I'm balancing it with working on the app and then as well working on videos and things like that. Can you just pick a hackberry and eat it? You can. Be careful because some of them, the inner seed can be very hard. So like don't break your teeth. But the coating on there, if you just popped in your mouth and then kind of like chewed off the coating and then spit the seed out, that's a totally viable thing that you could do. So yeah, if you wanted to, you just, grab a handful, pop in your mouth, chew them. And yeah, that is something that you definitely can do. Have you ever made persimmon jam? I've attempted many times and it never worked well for me. So every time that I've tried to make jam where I'm like cooking persimmon, it turns in really mealy and gummy in a not good way. So I mean, I've made persimmon jam kind of where I just like process it to get until it's like all liquidy. And I don't cook it, and I've done that a bunch. But yeah, when I cook it directly, it doesn't work very well. However, it bakes very well. So to make persimmon pudding or persimmon bread or things like that, it works incredibly well. Okay, I think this will be the last question that I answer that I'm seeing, or two more. So, do I know anyone who uses the tannic solution from acorns to tan animal hides? I think a friend of mine is trying that, but it's definitely a thing. So like the name tannin, I can't remember which way it went, but tannin is associated with tanning hides. So yeah, it's totally a viable thing that you can use for tanning animal hides. And yeah, if you're doing acorns, and you'll be getting a bunch of them, especially red oak acorns, you'll be getting a ton of tannin. And the last one, is there a way to add information to my app? Depending on what you mean, so you can use the journal to add all of your own personal notes and information on things. But then, if you feel like there's a thing missing, or you know anything like that, then you can always, on each species at the top right is a feedback button that you can enter, and that will give us a message of any suggestion that you have for a thing that we should add or change or whatever it might be. So that is definitely a way to do so. Tips on okay, this is the last question this time. Tips on gathering May apples before they're gone. Get them a little bit before they're completely ripe. May apples will ripen off the vine pretty well. You'll read a bunch of things saying you can't do this, but I've done it before several times. It's always been fine. So gather it a little bit before it's fully ripe, and then leave it somewhere to ripen off vine. And it should have a very aromatic smell. Smell very citrusy, tropical, and then you can eat the inner part from that. And I thought it was pretty good when I had it. I don't think it was like the best thing that I had in the entire world. It was very similar to passion fruit for me, so I'm glad that I had it and then I tried it. But if I miss my apple one year, it's not like you're missing like the most incredible divine fruit in the entire world. It is very good, but don't feel bad if you are missing it year to year. All right, everyone. I think that is going to be it for me. I see all your amazing comments, and I appreciate all those, and I appreciate you guys. I'll see you in the next video, the next class, the next video, wherever it might be. You guys know where to find me, right here on this channel. So until next time, I've really appreciated it, all your time, and yeah, looking forward to the next one. All right, everyone. Catch you later.